Welcome to World War II Ashes. Learn the untold.
June the 22nd, 1941. 3:15 a.m. Western Soviet Union. The night explodes. Artillery thunders across the border like the sky tearing itself apart. The ground shudders. Windows shatter in sleeping villages. Horses scream in their stalls. Along hundreds of miles of dark forest and open fields, men jerk awake to the sound of war arriving without warning. Searchlights stab upward. Flares hiss and bloom, bathing the mist in sickly white light. Engines roar. Thousands of them. Tanks grinding forward. Aircraft screaming overhead. The air smells of oil, damp earth, and cordite. German soldiers pour across the frontier. Some are laughing. Some are praying. Many believe the war will be over in weeks. Behind them, stretching from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea, 3 million men are moving east. This is Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in human history, and the moment the Second World War truly becomes a war of annihilation. Months earlier, Europe already lay bruised and burning. Poland crushed. France collapsed. Britain battered but unbroken. To the west, Hitler faced a stubborn island he could not conquer. To the east, he saw something else entirely. Opportunity. In August 1939, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union had stunned the world by signing a non-aggression pact. It was cynical. Temporary. Both sides knew it. The agreement bought time for Hitler to fight in the West, time for Stalin to rebuild a shattered Red Army after purges that had gutted its leadership. But ideology made coexistence impossible. Nazism demanded expansion. Lebensraum. Living space in the East, Bolshevism, in Hitler's mind, was not just an enemy state. It was a racial and ideological threat to be destroyed. By late 1940, after France fell, Hitler turned his gaze fully eastward. He believed the Soviet Union was rotten to the core. A colossus with feet of clay. He believed one hard blow would bring it crashing down. German intelligence underestimated Soviet strength. Badly, Hitler ignored warnings from his generals about distance, logistics, and winter. He brushed aside comparisons to Napoleon. He had something Napoleon did not: the blitzkrieg. Fast-moving armored spearheads. Close air support. Encirclement. Annihilation. The Wehrmacht had perfected it in Poland and France. Now, it would be unleashed on a scale never seen before. Planning began in secret. Rail timetables. Fuel stockpiles. Maps marked with rivers and cities most German officers could barely pronounce. Army Group North would drive toward Leningrad. Army Group Center would strike straight for Moscow. Army Group South would seize Ukraine, its grain fields and coal. The goal was simple: destroy the Red Army west of the Dnieper and Dvina rivers, end the war before winter. Stalin, meanwhile, stood paralyzed by disbelief. Despite dozens of intelligence warnings, from British sources, from Soviet spies, from border reports, he refused to believe Hitler would attack in 1941. He feared provocation. He feared being blamed for starting a war. Soviet border troops were ordered not to respond to German incursions. So when the attack came, many units were caught asleep. Airfields were bombed before planes could take off. Rows of Soviet aircraft burned on the ground, wingtip to wingtip. Communications collapsed. Commanders were killed or captured in the opening hours. Entire divisions were cut off before they understood what was happening. By sunrise, the invasion was in full motion. The German panzers punched deep into Soviet territory, bypassing resistance, leaving pockets of Red Army soldiers trapped behind them. Luftwaffe bombers shredded railways and bridges. Stuka dive bombers screamed down like mechanical predators, their sirens designed to terrorize as much as destroy. For German soldiers, the opening days felt unstoppable. Columns advanced dozens of miles a day. Prisoners marched west in endless lines, tens of thousands at a time. Soviet units disintegrated under the shock of speed and coordination, but beneath the surface, something darker was unfolding. This was not just a military campaign. It was a war of ideology. Special units followed behind the advancing armies. Einsatzgruppen, mobile killing squads, tasked with eliminating communist officials, partisans, and Jews. Lists were prepared in advance. Towns were searched. Men were separated from their families. Shots echoed in forests and ravines. The invasion brought with it a new level of brutality, systematic and deliberate for Soviet civilians. The war arrived as chaos. Refugees clogged roads, moving east on foot, with carts, with whatever they could carry. Mothers dragged children through fields as tanks thundered past. Villages burned. Crops were destroyed to deny them to the enemy. Fear spread faster than the armies, and yet, even as the Red Army reeled, it did not collapse. Isolated units fought on without orders. Border guards held positions until overrun. Pilots flew outdated aircraft straight into German formations. Factories deep in the Soviet interior began preparing for evacuation. Machines dismantled, loaded onto trains, sent east beyond the Urals. Stalin, shaken by the scale of the disaster, withdrew into silence for days. When he finally spoke to the nation, his voice carried something new, not ideology, survival. He called it the Great Patriotic War. By July, German forces had encircled entire Soviet armies at Minsk and Smolensk. Hundreds of thousands of prisoners were taken. German commanders reported victory after victory. Maps in Berlin were already being redrawn, but distance began to stretch, supply lines thin. Roads turned to dust. Fuel trucks lagged behind the spearheads. Soviet resistance, though disorganized, hardened, and in the vastness of the East, time began to behave differently. The invasion that was meant to end the war in weeks was swallowing men, machines, uncertainty at an alarming rate. As summer burned on and the front pushed ever deeper into Soviet territory, one question began to haunt those driving eastward. What if the Soviet Union did not fall? What if this war, meant to be quick, decisive, final, had just opened a door that could never be closed? Summer deepens. The days grow longer. The killing grows faster. By early July 1941, the German advance has torn a massive wound into the Soviet Union. Entire Red Army formations vanish from the map. At Minsk, then Smolensk, enormous encirclements swallow hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers. Columns of prisoners stretch for miles, dusty, exhausted men guarded by troops who believe the war is already won. German commanders report figures that seem unreal. 0.3 million Soviet casualties in weeks. The blitzkrieg appears unstoppable. Army Group Center surges forward through Belarus, its panzers racing east along primitive roads, engines overheating, tracks grinding down. The landscape opens into vast plains and endless forests. Rivers become obstacles. Villages blur past. Maps fail to capture the scale of the land they are crossing. To the north, Army Group North drives toward Leningrad, smashing through the Baltic states. Soviet defenders retreat, regroup, then counterattack, often without coordination, sometimes without ammunition. The fighting is desperate. Close. Personal. In the south, Army Group South crashes into Ukraine, where resistance stiffens immediately. Soviet forces fight harder here, knowing the value of the land behind them. Tank battles erupt around Brody and Dubno, some of the largest armored clashes the world has ever seen. Thousands of tanks collide in smoke and flame. German crews are stunned to encounter Soviet machines they did not expect. The T-34. Sloped armor. Wide tracks. A gun that can kill any German tank it meets for the first time. German panzer crews feel something unfamiliar. Concerned, the Red Army is battered, but it is learning. Adapting. Soviet commanders begin abandoning rigid doctrine, improvising under fire. They trade space for time. They counterattack not to win, but to bleed. Meanwhile, the Luftwaffe rules the sky. Soviet air power is shattered in the opening days, with thousands of aircraft destroyed on the ground. German pilots rack up kill counts that defy belief. Bombers fly almost unchallenged, hitting rail junctions, bridges, headquarters. Supply lines crumble. Communication breaks down, yet the deeper the Germans push, the more the war changes, distances stretch, supply columns thin. Fuel shortages slow armored spearheads. Infantry marches for days under a brutal sun, boots wearing through, water scarce. Trucks break down. Horses collapse. The Soviet Union is vast in a way no European campaign has prepared them for, and behind the lines, the war turns savage. The Einsatzgruppen begin systematic mass murder. Jewish communities are rounded up. Political officers are executed. Civilians accused of partisan activity disappear. Entire villages are erased. Soldiers are ordered to see the war as racial, existential, merciless. Some obey without hesitation, others look away, many participate. On the Soviet side, terror answers terror. NKVD units shoot deserters. Civilians suspected of collaboration vanish into prisons or forests. The state demands total resistance. Retreat without orders is treason. Stalin's grip tightens. Factories are dismantled piece by piece and shipped east by rail. Entire industrial cities move across the Urals under bombing and chaos. Workers sleep beside machines, assembling tanks in freezing sheds before walls are even finished. Production never fully stops. By August, the front line slow, German generals argue. Should the main thrust continue toward Moscow? Or should forces be diverted to secure Ukraine and Leningrad first? Hitler decides the drive on Moscow is paused. Panzer units are redirected south to encircle Soviet forces near Kiev. The operation succeeds tactically, one of the largest encirclements in history. Over 500,000 Soviet troops are captured, but time is slipping away. The summer that was supposed to decide everything is bleeding into autumn, and the Soviets are still fighting. In the north, Leningrad is encircled but not taken. The city starves rather than surrender. In the south, the Red Army retreats but refuses to collapse. In the center, new Soviet armies appear, formed from reserves the Germans never believed existed. Then the weather turns, rains fall. Roads dissolve into mud. Vehicles bog down axle deep. Men push tanks by hand. Horses die in the sludge. Supply columns crawl. Ammunition runs short. Food spoils. The infamous Rasputitsa. German soldiers curse the land, the weather, the endlessness of it all, yet still, orders come. Forward. By October, the drive toward Moscow resumes. Operation Typhoon begins. One final push. One last gamble. The German forces break through again, encircling more Soviet armies at Vyazma and Bryansk. Panic grips Moscow. Government offices prepare to evacuate. Foreign embassies burn documents. Civilians dig trenches in city parks. Stalin remains, publicly defiant, privately terrified. The cold arrives early. Frost forms on weapons. Engines fail. Oil thickens. German uniforms, designed for short campaigns, offer little protection. Soviet troops, born to the climate, endure better. Ski units strike from forests. Partisans sabotage rail lines. Every village becomes dangerous. The Red Army stiffens. Fresh divisions arrive from Siberia. Troops transferred after Soviet intelligence confirms Japan will not attack in the east. Well-equipped. Winter-trained. Determined, German soldiers begin to freeze in place, and for the first time since June, the momentum shifts. The question is no longer whether the Soviet Union will fall. It is whether the German army can survive what is coming next, because as the temperature plunges and the front stalls outside Moscow, the Red Army prepares an answer, one that will shatter the illusion of invincibility forever. December comes hard and fast. The temperature plunges. -20. -30. Breath freezes in the air. Metal burns skin on contact. Weapons jam. Men wrap rags around boots, hands, faces, anything to slow the cold. Frostbite spreads faster than fear. Outside Moscow, the German army reaches its breaking point. They can see the city's distant spires through binoculars. Sometimes at night, they glimpse the glow of lights on the horizon. So close. Close enough to believe victory is still possible, but the German advance has stalled. Supply lines are shattered. Trucks will not start. Horses freeze where they stand. Artillery crews hammer shells into iced-over breaches. Infantry dig shallow foxholes into ground frozen like stone, and then the Soviets strike back. On December 5, 1941, the Red Army launches a massive counter-offensive along the Moscow front. Fresh Siberian divisions surge forward through snowstorms, white camouflage blending into the frozen landscape. Ski troops glide silently through forests, striking flanks and rear positions. Tanks, T-34s, move where German vehicles cannot. The shock is immediate, though German units that have never known retreat are forced backward. Entire regiments fall apart in the cold. Officers lose control. Communications fail. Panic spreads. Hitler responds with fury. He forbids retreat, not a step back. Generals argue that holding exposed positions will destroy the army. Hitler overrules them. Units are ordered to stand fast, often without winter gear, without ammunition, without hope of resupply. Thousands die where they stand, but the front does not collapse completely. German soldiers cling to frozen ground, fighting defensively for the first time. The Red Army pushes them back dozens, sometimes hundreds of kilometers, but cannot annihilate them. The battle for Moscow ends in January 1942. The capital survives, and with it, the Soviet Union. Operation Barbarossa has failed. The consequences are immediate and irreversible. Germany has lost the war of annihilation it believed would be quick and decisive. Millions of Soviet soldiers are dead or captured, but the Red Army still exists. Soviet industry is intact. Soviet manpower is vast. And now, Soviet confidence is growing. The myth of German invincibility is broken across Europe. Resistance movements take heart. In London and Washington, planners see a path forward. And in Berlin, the realization begins to sink in. This war will not be won in a single season, but the worst is yet to come. In 1942, Hitler doubles down. He launches a new offensive toward the Caucasus and Stalingrad, chasing oil and glory. Once again, the Wehrmacht advances deep into Soviet territory. Once again, the front stretches too far. Once again, winter approaches. Stalingrad becomes the graveyard of German ambition. The Sixth Army is encircled. Starved. Frozen. Bombed. In February 1943, it surrenders. Over 300,000 men lost. From that moment on, the strategic initiative belongs to the Red Army. Barbarossa has become a war of survival. For Germany, the Eastern Front consumes everything. By 1944, Soviet forces smash through Belarus in Operation Bagration, annihilating Army Group Center. German losses dwarf even those of Stalingrad. The Wehrmacht bleeds beyond recovery. By 1945, Soviet troops fight street by street in Berlin itself. The city that launched the invasion now lies in ruins beneath artillery fire. On April 30, 1945, Adolf Hitler kills himself in a bunker beneath the capital. The war he unleashed ends days later. Operation Barbarossa reshaped the 20th century. It killed more people than any campaign in human history. Soldiers and civilians alike. Cities erased. Nations scarred. Ideologies hardened. Borders redrawn. More than 27 million Soviet citizens are dead by war's end. Germany is destroyed, Europe is divided, and the world enters the Cold War. All of it traces back to that dawn on June 22, 1941, when engines roared, artillery thundered, and an empire crossed a line it could never retreat from. Barbarossa was not just a military invasion. It was a gamble against geography, climate, industry, and human endurance. A gamble that failed, and in failing, it changed everything. Today, when we study modern warfare, logistics, overextension, intelligence failure, the shadow of Barbarossa looms large. It reminds us that speed cannot replace strategy, that ideology blinds judgment, that wars begun in arrogance often end in ruin. The Eastern Front was where the fate of Nazi Germany was decided, not in Normandy, not in Africa, but in the endless forests, frozen fields, and ruined cities of the Soviet Union. If this story made you pause, reflect, or see World War II differently, consider what lessons still matter today. History does not repeat, but it echoes, and sometimes those echoes begin at dawn.
Thanks for watching this chapter of World War II. If you find this video helpful, please support us by liking and dropping a comment. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to catch the next chapter of this series. Until then, take care.